The Tao of Heidegger by Tim Delaune. Being and Nothing. The connections between Taoism and Heidegger's thought on being and its relation to the nothing are legion, and are the subject of much scholarship. They will be treated only briefly here. First, however, there is a conundrum worthy of mention. Heidegger seems to have drawn extensively upon very concise, enigmatic sources for his work, especially in Being and Time, and did so admiringly. What we still possess of Parmenides' didactic poem fits into one slim volume, one that discredits the presumed necessity of entire libraries of philosophical literature, Heidegger claims. Yet, in contrast to the Book of 5,000 Characters, as the Lao Tzu is sometimes called, which must rank amongst the most profound of the world's short philosophical texts, the length and architectonic complexity of Being and Time are formidable. Was Heidegger engaged in a complex exegesis of Eastern and pre-Socratic thought? Being and Time was written before we can be certain that Heidegger had been exposed to the Tao Te Ching, and his later works are somewhat shorter. It is possible that this is further evidence that, enamored as Heidegger was of Eastern and pre-Socratic concision, he felt keenly the need to bring these foreign understandings to light in a form that would be at least reasonably understandable to an audience steeped in a substantially more verbose Western philosophical tradition. This mystery must remain open for the present. Further work is needed to understand why this admirer of open-textured, short philosophical texts nonetheless himself wrote giant, plodding tomes. Turning to the substance of Being and Nothing, we can see that there are precise connections between the text of the Tao Te Ching and Heidegger's understanding of the interrelationship between these two. As Ellen Chen has recently shown, Taoism answers Heidegger's fundamental question, why is there any being at all and not rather nothing? Quote, "The world comes to be because nothing, which is not an entity, is yet a reversive movement. Reversion is the movement of the Tao." Tao Te Ching, chapter 40. Nothing reverts and becomes a world of beings. Nothing not only becomes all beings, nothing accompanies all beings throughout their careers. It is the internal dynamism that prompts all beings to emerge, unfold, to be spent, and finally to self-destruct. In the being of beings, the nihilation of the nothing goes on. The Tao Te Ching, chapter 51, says, "Therefore Tao gives birth. De, nature, keeps, grows, nurtures, matures, ripens, covers, and buries." Unquote. Heidegger hints at the same process when he claims that nothing, rather than being detached from what is in totality, rather functions as if at one with what is in totality. Thus, in The Turning, Heidegger appears to claim, like the Tao Te Ching, that nothing turns and becomes a world of beings, being bringing itself to pass sheerly out of its own essence of concealedness. Chen is thus in agreement with modern Taoism scholar Norman J. Girardot, who sees early Taoist thought in terms of a mythology of creation, fall, and salvational return, in a cycle that, however, is the inverse of what Western readers tend to expect. The fall is a fall into order, and salvation is a return back into chaos, not an escape into some heavenly other world. Similarly, Chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching directly states that the universe was produced from non-being, i.e., the Tao's nameless aspect, which then gave birth to being, the Tao that can be named, and is called Mother, which then gave birth through the opposition of yin and yang to the 10,000 things. Chapter 2 restates this idea as being and non-being interdepend in growth, or determinacy, yo, and indeterminacy, wu, give rise to each other. And Chapter 40 confirms, the things of this world come from being, and being comes from non-being, or the events of the world arise from the determinate, yo, and the determinate arises from the indeterminate, wu. This is an ancient insight of the East Asian way of thinking to the effect that yu, being, and wu, nothing, mutually produce one another, zheng sheng, that has been translated variously as being and non-being give birth to one another, and being and non-being engender one another. Heidegger, too, sees the nameless, the nothing, as the source of being. According to May, these ideas are remarkably similar to Heidegger in The Question of Being and What is Metaphysics, in which Heidegger states that being and nothing are not beside one another, but rather each uses itself on behalf of the other, and that nothing and being are the same. We have good grounds, then, for supposing that Heidegger elaborated, sometimes verbatim, these kinds of correspondence with the help of Taoist texts with which he was familiar, and integrated them into his work. Similarly, quoting from the Introduction to Metaphysics, Chen notes that Heidegger claims that he who speaks of nothing by making it into a something contradicts himself, and Chen surmises that perhaps for this reason Heidegger does not have much to say about the substance of the nothing. Politics. Heidegger also does not have much to say, at least explicitly, about politics. Could this be connected to what the Tao Te Ching has to say about governance? Certainly the latter is far from silent on this subject. The Tao Te Ching is in two parts, the Book of the Tao and the Book of the De, with the latter primarily dealing with application of principles in the former, particularly to politics and governance. Schipper claims that, as a whole, the Tao Te Ching presents itself as a philosophical text which considers the human being in his role as sovereign. The aphorisms take on the appearance of prescriptions in the art of government. And indeed, some versions of Taoist classics have indeed been quite openly populist, or explicitly shaped by interests and enthusiasms which go well beyond those of pure scholarship. This was especially the case after World War II, when Heidegger and Zhao were in the thick of their ultimately abandoned translation project, when interpretations of the Tao Te Ching as a possible antidote to Western problems came to the fore. So what does the Tao Te Ching suggest about politics? Lao Tzu recommends government by non-interference. Governments must bypass the dilemma of action, recognizing in particular the futility of trying to control so complex a thing as a nation. Bypassing action is accomplished through non-action, a concept indicated in the Tao Te Ching by the term wu wei, inaction, spontaneity or naturalness, which is used in complex ways throughout the text, and is seen as providing many conflicting counsels for rulers and even war leaders. Wu wei literally means not doing, but as a philosophical concept is used to indicate spontaneity, naturalness of action without conscious premeditation, and non-intervention in the natural flow of events. The Tao Te Ching is both anti-intellectual and anti-militaristic. It advises that the sage govern with great prudence and treat his country as though it were his own body. Governing through wu wei causes all things to be well ordered. Government attempts at control are self-defeating because they rely on forms of aggression against the nature of man. Thus, the country of the Tao is the land of natural anarchy and inner harmony. The teaching of the Tao Te Ching as to how to rule the country refers the reader to this here, that is, the belly, the empty center, the seat of an intuitive and inner perception, which one can only apprehend by remaining in inaction. Taoism did not seek to enlighten the people, but to keep them in a kind of ignorance constituting a healthy mistrust of all established ideas and prejudices. It is also possible to interpret the Tao Te Ching as equipping the cunning and canny statesman with the tools that will allow him to bring about the fall of the proud and mighty by giving them enough rope to hang themselves, not in order to take their place, but rather to bring the downfall of their threatening presence. Importantly, however, prescriptions for good government in the Tao Te Ching rely upon the action or non-action of a wise ruler, a Taoist sage. The Tao Te Ching does not preach anarchy, but rather a state of affairs brought about by a sage ruler. The Taoist sage alone can put an end to the artificial projects of civilization and allow the majority of people to return to a state of non-action. This ruling sage does not, however, look anything like the famous or infamous rulers with whom we are familiar from history. According to the Tao Te Ching, the best ruler is one who the people simply know is there. He pursues many negative policies, such as not advancing men of worth, emptying the minds of the people of useless knowledge leading to multiplication of false needs, and refraining from war to the extent possible. According to Taoist scholar Benjamin Schwartz, quote, One might say that in a true Taoist society, the authority of the truly Taoist universal king may be as natural as the presence of the dominant male in the group life of many higher mammals. However one may account for the origins of human civilization, it is suggested throughout the text that only Taoist sage rulers can reverse the pathology of civilization." Unquote. It is here, in the person of the sage, that one can find an important link to Heidegger's relatively sparse political thought. In his posthumously published interview with Der Spiegel, Heidegger claims that, quote, "philosophy will not be able to effect an immediate transformation of the present condition of the world. This is not only true of philosophy, but of all merely human thought and endeavor. Only a God can save us. The sole possibility that is left for us is to prepare a sort of readiness, through thinking and poetizing, for the appearance of the God or for the absence of the God in the time of foundering. For in the face of the God who is absent, we founder." Unquote. Could this God be a figure akin to the Taoist sage? This would certainly be a more comforting image than that of a reborn Reichsführer. One can only speculate whether Heidegger was pointing in this direction. Nonetheless, in the same interview, Heidegger provided this intriguing lead. And who of us can say whether or not one day in Russia and China the ancient tradition of a thought will awaken which will help make possible for man a free relationship to the technical world? Technology. Thus the question of politics leads us to the question concerning technology. Here Heidegger produced much published thought, and the connections between it and Taoism are significantly clearer. Two strains of argument can be drawn from Heidegger's criticisms of modern technology. 1. It uses up the beings in the world, and 2. It does so in such a way as to turn beings into fungible, stored-up energy. Though interrelated, these can be teased out and addressed separately. The first strain might be called the sustainability objection, and the second the fungibility objection. Both have strong resonance in the Tao Te Ching. Heidegger makes the sustainability objection most trenchantly in the question concerning technology. Modern technology challenges nature by making the unreasonable demand that it supply energy which can be extracted and stored as such. But does this not hold true for the old windmill as well? No. Its sails do indeed turn in the wind. They are left entirely to the wind's blowing. But the windmill does not unlock energy from the air currents in order to store it. Contrast mining, which turns fields from something cared for and maintained by peasants in order to produce food into resources stripped from the earth in a way that renders it unusable in the future. This is not a setting in order to take care and maintain, but a setting upon nature. In Graham Parks's view, among Taoism's attitudes toward technology and nature are these. Humans thrive when they practice wu wei, activity that doesn't disrupt the spontaneous unfolding of natural forces and phenomena. Technology is okay when wu wei, suspect when yu wei being activity disruptive of or not in harmony with the forces of heaven and earth. An important component of Taoist understanding of nature and the natural is ziran, i.e. spontaneous self-unfolding, of processes in the context of myriad things that are. Although the ziran of anything higher on the food chain curtails that of those lower, it is limited in its capacity to do so by overconsumption. E.g., if a herbivore species consumes all of the available vegetation, then its numbers diminish and its self-unfolding ends. The notion of ziran is thus connected with natural limits. Similarly, quote, on the Heideggerian view, to take things as to hand is not necessarily to manipulate or mishandle them. It is quite possible to take advantage of the power of nature in a way that is quite compatible with the Taoists' wu wei. In making use of the wind to propel a sailboat, for example, or of water to drive a mill wheel, we can contribute to the winds and waters being what they are in themselves. In making responsible use of fire or in using a tree for shade, we can, by bringing forth their appropriate possibilities, reveal those elements more fully in their being." Unquote. Lao Tzu favors a return to natural society as a rejection of ingenious devices, complex machinery of production and communication, which not only distract the individual from self-cultivation, but represent a form of excessive activity which inevitably defeats itself. Specific modern examples might be farm surpluses resulting from improved mechanized agriculture, the population problem resulting from medical advances, and the problem of survival presented by knowledge of nuclear physics. Though this distinction implies some difficulty in determining what counts as complex machinery, Parks suggests that one can lay out various implements on a spectrum from wu-wei to yu-wei, such that at the wu-wei end would lie windmills, sailboats, watermills, and the like, implements that make use of the natural forces of wind, water, and gravity without abusing them or using them up, and at the yu-wei end would lie such technologies as nuclear power plants, which disrupt natural processes monstrously, in that the reactions that power them require extremely complex technical procedures generating toxic waste on vastly different quantitative and temporal scales than when uranium decomposes naturally. Parks argues that Taoists would also discourage one from seeking to avoid fated limitations to life or health, e.g. by recourse to expensive, sophisticated technology, such that these medical procedures disrupt the natural course of things at the expense of the whole. Similarly, quote, Heidegger describes how nihilism arises from the obsession with beings that attempts to compensate for the emptiness deriving from the broader context of being, Tao. As technology manufactures more and more to fill the void, its drive for control and its understanding of the natural world as mere raw material eventually extend to encompass human beings. Unquote. As for the fungibility objection, the idea that beings can be turned into stored-up, readily exchanged energy appears to have troubled Heidegger greatly. Agriculture is now the mechanized food industry. Air is now set upon to yield nitrogen, the earth to yield ore to yield uranium, for example. Uranium is set upon to yield atomic energy, which can be unleashed for either destructive or for peaceful purposes. This kind of setting upon expedites, unlocks, exposes, in order to further something else than the fulfillment of the being of the resources consumed, providing maximum yield at minimum expense, by storing energy so that it can be on call, turned into something else and used to power, for instance, a factory. So too, a hydroelectric plant on the Rhine sets upon the river to turn its motion into stored electricity. Quote, in the context of the interlocking processes pertaining to the orderly disposition of electric energy, even the Rhine itself appears to be something at our command. The hydroelectric plant is not built into the Rhine River as was the old wooden bridge that joined bank with bank for hundreds of years. Rather, the river is dammed up into the power plant. What the river is now, namely a water power supplier, derives for the essence of the power station. Unquote. The river is no longer a river, but stored up power, just as the air is no longer air, but stored up nutrients for plants that are no longer plants, but stored up food, which is itself fuel for animals, more stored up food, or for humans, who themselves become human resources in the mode of available labor. Technology on a mass scale reverses the unfolding of beings by leveling them down to the same common denominator, pure energy, which, worse still, can be employed to make even more energy out of even more beings. Such challenging happens in that the energy concealed in nature is unlocked. What is unlocked is transformed. What is transformed is stored up. What is stored up is in turn distributed, and what is distributed is switched about ever anew. This circularity of consumption for the sake of consumption is the sole procedure which distinctively characterizes the history of a world which has become an unworld. It is possible to connect this concern with the making by technology of the world into an unworld to Taoist thought. One can see why Heidegger might fear the reuniting by leveling down into pure energy of the multiplicity of things. Such a development would reverse the direction of the fundamental struggle that allows for the presencing of beings. Quote, as Heraclitus thinks it, struggle first and foremost allows what essentially unfolds to step apart in opposition. First allows position and status and rank to establish themselves in coming to presence. In such a stepping apart, clefts, intervals, distances, and joints open themselves up. In confrontation, world comes to be. But confrontation does not divide or destroy, but rather builds unity. It is the gathering, logos. Unquote. It would also reverse the direction of the Tao. According to chapter 42 of the Tao Te Ching, out of Tao, one is born. Out of one, two. out of 2, 3, out of 3, the created universe. Or, waymaking, Tao, gives rise to continuity. Continuity gives rise to difference. Difference gives rise to plurality, and plurality gives rise to the manifold of everything that is happening. Wan Wu. On this basis, technologies that turn beings into stored-up no-thing not only wastefully run through the available beings at an unsustainable rate, but also threaten to bring beings to an end altogether. On this read, it is not terribly surprising that Heidegger was able to lump together mechanized industrial agriculture, atomic bombs, and the manufacture of corpses in gas chambers and extermination camps. The last of these may horrify us most because it directly obliterates human beings, and it is poorly chosen in light of Heidegger's former membership in the Nazi Party, but in the context of Heidegger's concerns regarding technology, it is really just one more symptom of the same being-threatening disease. If Taoism, and Eastern thought generally, inspired Heidegger on this front, however, how can one explain his comment in the Der Spiegel interview that, quote, a reversal can be prepared only in the same place in the world where the modern technological world originated, and it cannot happen because of any takeover by Zen Buddhism or any other Eastern experience of the world. There is need for a rethinking which is to be carried out with the help of the European tradition and of a new appropriation of that tradition. Thinking itself can be transformed only by a thinking which has the same origin and calling." Unquote. Perhaps the appropriate emphasis is not on Zen Buddhism, but on takeover. If the East, to Heidegger's mind, was not yet corrupted by technology, then it could not dialectically overcome the technological problematic of the West. Nevertheless, its thought might still be borrowed from in order to inform the West in an attempt to transform its own thinking concerning technology.